but we're not really pushing the boundaries of using AI as this creative sparring partner.
Have you been engaging your hybrid intelligence? Welcome to the Coaching Revealed podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Austin Matzelle. In this episode, I'm joined by my co-host, Emily Terrani, as we interview Dr. Cornelia C. Walther about how coaches can stay centered on what makes us human while effectively using new tools. Dr. Cornelia is a humanitarian, author, and creator of the POZE model, which explores pro-social use of AI for uplifting humans and society. Cornelia shares insights from her years of experience with UNICEF and her work supporting human development, including her POZE model, which includes P for perspective, O, optimization, Z, zeniths, continuous growth, not a single peak, and E, exposure. The framework is grounded in change, connection, continuum, and complementarity. She explains how the model helps coaches and clients navigate complexity through 4 core dimensions: aspirations, emotions, thoughts, and sensations. The conversation moves to explore the concept of hybrid intelligence, the complementarity between human judgment and artificial intelligence. Cornelia offers practical ways for coaches to foster ethical awareness in their clients. Throughout the episode, Cornelia emphasizes the importance of AI literacy, ethical self-awareness, and defining personal values in the face of rapid technological change. For coaches, she offers both mindset shifts and actionable tools to help bridge human values with AI-enhanced practices. Thanks for tuning into Coaching Revealed. Let's get started.
Cornelia C. Walther, PhD, is a thought catalyst in hybrid intelligence and pro-social AI. Her scope combines theory and practice. As a humanitarian practitioner, she worked with the United Nations for 2 decades in large-scale emergencies in West Africa, Asia, and Latin America, focusing on hybrid advocacy and social and behavioral change. She collaborates with universities across the Americas and Europe as a lecturer, executive coach, and researcher. She is presently a senior fellow at the Wharton Initiative for Neuroscience, WIN/Wharton AI and Analytics, and a senior fellow at the School of Dental Medicine. She is affiliated with MindCore and the Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics at the University of Pennsylvania. Since 2021, her focus has been on aspirational algorithms and the potential to harness technology for social good. She has said artificial intelligence for inspired action, AI for IA. In 2017, she initiated the POZE, perspective, optimization, zeniths, exposure, dynamic in Haiti, which has since grown into a global transdisciplinary network of like-minded researchers and practitioners committed to inclusive social change. So Cornelia, it is so wonderful to have you here today. I know Austin and myself are really excited to dive in and talk with you. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I guess just to start, it would be wonderful to learn about what excites you about coaching in the context of all of the amazing things that you've done in your career so far. How does that connect to coaching?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a great question to start, and it's in a way an entry point into how my journey evolved so organically from humanitarian action to hybrid intelligence, because it's all anchored in this logic of change from the inside out. And how can we move beyond telling people what they have to do or what they should do towards making them want to do it? And I think the beauty in coaching is that it's in a way the logic of the midwife. Everything is already there, and you're just supporting the natural process. And I think that's, for me, the magic in coaching, that it's just about helping the coachee to identify and share what they all have inside already.
I really, really enjoy that type of sentiment of just this magic of coaching being about the relationship between you and the other person. And I feel like that ties in a lot with your work, looking at the interconnectedness that exists within people and then within societies and even the world at large. And I'm wondering, how did that interest of the interconnectedness of everything emerge for you as a person?
So as you mentioned, or as Emily mentioned in the introduction, I've been working with UNICEF for 20 years in humanitarian operations. And after all this time and having seen amazing things happening, but also the worst in people, I just came to the conclusion that the ultimate gift that you can give somebody is not stuff, but is to help them reveal the treasures that we all carry inside. And that led me to prototype and develop the POZE paradigm, which we prototyped in Haiti with social workers, and which resides on the very simple premise that you can give outside only what you have found inside. Coming to your question about the interconnectedness, the logic of POZE is that each of us is a composition of twice four dimensions with aspirations, emotions, thoughts, and sensations at the individual level, and individuals as part of communities, countries, and the planet at the collective level. And that if we really want to bring about sustainable social change or personal transformation, we need to not only look at each of these dimensions, but also start to recognize and systematically influence their mutual interplays. So the micro, meso, macro, and meta.
So, for anyone listening in today, maybe now would be a great time to kind of give that high level view of the POZE model, what each of the letters stands for, and the interplay that exists within it.
So the P stands for perspective, a new perspective to life and living. The optimization relates back to these interplays, that it's not just about considering our own experiences and expressions as a patchwork, but that it is an organically evolving kaleidoscope that we can seek to understand and influence, which then leads to a gradual succession of zeniths. We tend to grow up with this understanding of that there's one peak and then there's a down. When we consider the logic of successive zeniths, then it's once you have reached one zenith, you're already moving towards the next one. Yes, there might be downturns in between, but we are constantly evolving. And that perspective then leads to a different exposure to life as it is or as it could be. So the four principles, if you like, that underpin POZE are change, everything is always changing, connection, everything is connected, complementarity, everything stands in complementarity to something else and does not exist in isolation, and the continuum. One experience is leading up to another one and to another one. And that is not the classic way in which we look at human existence.
Ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started. This is fascinating. What would you identify about the model as so effective in affecting change, in social change?
It's on the one hand, everything that I'm saying, and I will underline that, it's not new. The only thing that makes POZE different is the fact that it offers a coherent framework to bring together what has been said by thinkers and practitioners for the past 2 millennia and puts it into one coherent understanding. And I think the two things that are very impactful is, on the one hand, this shifted perception of the self, that it offers practical entry points, especially for coaching, that no longer you consider yourself as this bundle of complex challenges, but now you have 4 concrete entry points: your aspiration, your purpose, your emotion, how do you feel about yourself or about others, your thoughts, just your rational process, and your sensations, so your physical environment. And that, distilling it down into those entry points, makes personal change much more feasible, because it's no longer this black box that seems so overwhelming. And the second part that I found useful is that it puts the person in the driver's seat, because with everything that's going on, it's very easy to be drawn into this, I can't do anything. I'm anyhow just a tiny wheel in a huge machine. So if I'm changing anything, not going to make a difference. But if you consider that you are that small catalyst that can trigger a chain reaction, then everything changes, because you never know if that one thing, that one action, that one interaction that you might have one day could be that trigger that changes everything. And that is much more empowering than the victim perspective.
A lot to ponder on. I guess one of my first questions coming up, especially given our audience, is how can coaches weave this into their work and their coaching?
So something that I found very helpful in coaching relationships in the past is the 4 macro questions. So the why, who, where, and what. And again, this is something very simplistic, and I apologize if your listeners are already doing that. But what can be helpful both for the coach as much as for the coachee is to just make a list of why are you here? Who are you as a human being? Where do you stand in your life? And what are you doing to align your aspirations and your actions? So differently said, your purpose, your personality, your pursuit, and your passion. No matter whom I talk to, be that CEOs, be that humanitarian leaders, or be that community workers, it is surprising that we hardly ever ask ourselves these basic questions. Once they are answered, and I don't think that the answer is as important as the question itself, just placing those questions on our mental radar can serve as a compass.
I like the idea of a compass just being that tool that helps move people in a direction that can be more impactful. And I'm going to use that as a segue then also to bring in a lot of your other work in the space of hybrid intelligence and artificial intelligence and these other types of tools that coaches can be using for the space of pro-social AI. So bringing that component into this overall conversation as well, just for the audience today, how do you define hybrid intelligence, and how do you see the role of AI-based tools impacting coaches?
Hybrid intelligence arises from the complementarity of natural and artificial intelligences. I would argue that that can be measured by 4 assets, which are the attitude, the approach, the ability, and the ambition. And to drill that down further, the attitude is the awareness of who we are as human beings and the impact that our artificial tools have on us and on others and on society overall. The appreciation of what makes us unique as human beings without technology, and also appreciation of what added value AI can bring to us, and acceptance of the limitations. Not just the acceptance of the limitations of the AI, but our own as well, and accountability. Because ultimately, it's the old saying that still holds true: garbage in, garbage out versus values in, values out. We can't expect from the technology of tomorrow to live up to values that the humans of today do not live up to. Then the second one is the approach, which relates back to a double alignment. So alignment of aspiration and action, and aspiration and algorithm. And that needs to start offline and then can be replicated online. And then the ability, and that comes back maybe to the core piece, which is double literacy, human literacy, so a holistic understanding of brain and body, self and society, and algorithmic literacy, not just what's the latest tool, but what it is, how it works, and why it works the way it does. And finally, the ambition. Because it's easy or it's tempting to be drawn along this AI, either gloom or glory discourse, but ultimately we have a choice. And I think if we set our ambitions very high, then we can expect very high outcomes, not just for our own personal interests, but for the world at large. And for me, the core values in that context would be the authenticity. So to remain human beings with AI, not because of AI, altruism, and that not in a naive saying, but as a very pragmatic way forward, because we are all together on one planet. Some of us might be more privileged than others, but ultimately we're all in the same boat. And then agility, because what was true yesterday can also be completely wrong tomorrow. And especially with AI and with everything else that is happening, we need to have a lifelong learning journey. And finally, autonomy. The fact that AI is a tool to an end, and it's up to the human being to decide what that end might be. So all of this taken together, and I apologize for the long answer, all of this taken together enables the human user to design, deliver, and deploy pro-social AI.
Yeah, I'm curious, that concept of garbage in and garbage out. I'm considering, for not just the tool of AI, but in kind of anything someone does, that sense is true of garbage in and garbage out. And so what I'm wondering is, what are some of, the potential natural tendencies and shortcomings of humans to enact garbage in, garbage out? And how can we use a tool such as artificial intelligence potentially to be more aware of the things that we're doing and the impact that we have on other people?
I think a very practical example are our biases and our mental shortcuts. Probably most of your listeners know about the fantastic work of Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. He has written a whole book about this. But the fact that most of us have probably read that book, I know of myself, I have read it 3 times, does in no way protect me from falling prey to the various biases that are described in that. That leads me back to the 4 A's of the attitude, which start with awareness. And in that sense, I think if we use AI in a deliberate way, we can train it as a buddy who keeps us accountable and who can actually remind us when we're about to fall prey to our biases. And that's one of the tools that I'm currently working on, which is basically your AI buddy in the pocket, or better to say, your HI buddy in the pocket, your hybrid intelligence buddy in the pocket. Coming back to your question of, well, AI is a mirror. It cannot be better than the human beings that design, deliver, and use it. So if we have biased human beings and biased data to train the algorithm, then it is very unlikely that we will get unbiased algorithms and unbiased data in an outcome.
I'm wondering, with the use of the data, what are some examples, because you mentioned the term pro-social AI. So how do we overcome these biases in the honor of pro-social AI? And just what are some examples of it? How do you even define what that means and what that is?
So pro-social AI relates to AI systems that are tailored, trained, tested, and targeted to bring out the best in and for people and planet. And the main distinction to the classic AI models is that the positive social impact is not considered as a collateral benefit, but it's the prime objective, which does not at all exclude that there is also a commercial benefit to it, but it's not the first consideration. And putting that into opposition to the first, second, and third industrial revolution, that is not what happened with innovation in the past. And the impact that generative AI has on the human mind and on social interactions, I would argue, is just too large to leave it in the commercial arena alone. And in terms of practical examples, there have been various studies showing that people of color are more often to be penalized or picked out by algorithms that are used for criminal purposes or criminal persecution. There are also examples that women, in particular, women of color, are more likely to be picked out. But even if you think about it in the medical context, like it's very often used for diagnosis nowadays. The diagnostic algorithms are trained on a very small set of users. Now, if you use that same algorithm in another context, say you use an algorithm that has been trained on the limited data set of US middle-aged white customers, and now all of a sudden you want to deploy that large at scale with Black Americans, the results are not going to be truthful and they might even cost lives. Taking this lens of diversity is a very practical consideration when it comes to AI.
As an individual user, as a coach using AI, how can we be active in doing more proactive engagement with these technologies and tools compared to solely using them from the commercial perspective?
So there are two things where I find it really interesting. And one is as helping yourself to think about your own thinking. So a very practical and simple exercise to do is to observe yourself when you're interacting with ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, whichever is your preferred one. Take a step back whilst you're interacting with the tool and realize, how does your behavior change? Like, are you willingly delegating a lot of the cognitive load, or are you using it to challenge yourself? Because, and that brings me back to a concept that was part of the last book and which is very dear to my heart, let's say, which is agency amidst AI, because I think it's a slippery slope from experimenting with it, using it regularly, towards relying, and to full-blown addiction. And that is a transition that we're all at risk of going through. Because let's face it, the human being is lazy. And if we can avoid cognitive effort, then we do that. And we embrace every opportunity to do it, especially if we're under time pressure. Keeping this voice of agency in the back of our minds whilst we use our tools can be really interesting. And then the second very practical exercise or endeavor is to use AI to push our creative comfort zones. We have all experimented with AI, I presume, or most of us. We tend to put the limit where we see our own limitations, but we're not really pushing the boundaries of using AI as this creative sparring partner and like really putting the ceiling where the stars are. We might still land on the moon, but just pushing this, what is possible, I think is a really interesting mental exercise.
I really like this concept of people challenging themselves and using AI tools in ways that push their limit and push the ceiling. So I'd love to know for you, Cornelia, how are you doing that? How are you kind of pushing your intellectual limits with AI as a tool?
That's a great question. And I actually use it in two ways, which are complementary. The first one, and your listeners, I apologize to them, I tend to have a very convoluted way sometimes of expressing myself, which might also come from the fact that English is not my mother tongue. But I find it sometimes interesting to put the AI in the position of, imagine you are a 5-year-old. How would you convey this concept to them? And it's quite interesting to hear your intellectual baby brought back in a very different language and expressions. And the other one is the image. because an image says so often much more than 2,000 words. And especially if you try to convey a concept to somebody who thinks very differently or who has a different way of perceiving, then having an image as an entry point can be really interesting. And also sometimes we come up with a visual imagination for a text, a poem, a methodology, and having the AI, who is not sitting in your head, come up with something is a really interesting experience. And also it helps us, I think, or at least it has helped me to see some of my blind spots.
Again, going with that analogy of like a mirror, it's a tool that has so many uses, which is so cool. Another area that we see a lot of the conversations around this tool being used is in the workplace specifically. But with your focus on pro-social use and humanitarian work, I wonder, what are some of your thoughts or dreams of how AI can impact quality of life for humans and individuals?
That's a big question, and I wish I had the answer if there is one. But I think the point is that right now, a lot of the debate around AI is about doing more of the same as we have always done, at less cost and in faster time. But how about doing something radically different? And how about really thinking not just as a question of efficiency and effectiveness, but how can we finally address the needs of all those 8 billion plus people who are out there? And to remember in that context that we are discussing here at a high luxury level. Because even so, there are millions and millions of people who are using ChatGPT on a daily basis. And even so, it had this extremely high adoption rate, higher probably than any other technology for the past many decades. But there are a couple of billion people out there who are not having access to electricity, clean water, or even 3 meals a day. And I think it's important to keep that at the back of our mind and to think about how can we systematically harness AI as a tool in terms of making quality education accessible to everyone, everywhere. How can we use it to make quality healthcare accessible everywhere, even to those where the next doctor is 5 miles away or 50 miles away, or where there's no hospital in a radius of 500 miles. So how can we start to think more about bottlenecks that matter for survival and for quality of life, rather than just thinking about AI and the future of work?
This is really interesting related to accessibility. So how do we use it to overcome the not so great side of humanity? Some of our human tendencies that, we could become a better species, do the better things for one another and the planet if we didn't have them. And that's where what you're speaking to, the hybrid aspect of AI can maybe, bring awareness to these things that we are blind to. But then also, you're speaking about how this is bringing more accessibility to the basic needs, but also how do we make this accessible, like the actual technology accessible to people? So I know that's a few different ideas, but I just love to hear your thoughts on all of that.
So the ABCD of silent AI issues that I like to keep in mind when getting too excited about AI is the agency erosion, the bond decay, the climate change, and finally the divided society. I think those four are by far not everything, but it's interesting to keep them at the back of our mind because agency decay is something that concerns everyone. The social erosion aspect, or the bond decay, if you like, is something where we also need to keep check of ourselves, that we're not delegating ever more, and especially moving away from human relationships to an always on, always friendly, always patient AI interaction. And then the climate piece, because as much potential as there is of using AI for positive social impact, it's also quite important to keep in mind that it has a huge energy impact, and that one single search on Google has insignificantly less energy footprint than asking that same question on ChatGPT. And it might be perceived as the same command. We're just typing something on a keypad, but it's not. And it's important to put the abstraction to the personal daily use. And finally, the divided society, which is what I said earlier. Just because many millions have access to ChatGPT doesn't mean that they should be the only ones that decide what the algorithms of tomorrow look like, but also it's those selected few that have a responsibility to make the best out of AI for those who can't.
How can coaches, with this understanding and awareness of all of these A, B, C, Ds, what can coaches do?
I tend to think that it's best to start oneself and to get a solid grip on what's my attitude towards AI, like what's my attitude towards myself, what's my attitude towards the AI, because we're right now all navigating an era of uncertainty. Nobody, and that includes the leaders of OpenAI, Meta, and all the others, nobody knows what's going to happen next month, next year. There are these big speculations going around artificial general intelligence or even artificial super intelligence. Whilst all of this is very exciting, I think we haven't even touched the surface of our natural intelligence. So that's why I'm so convinced that we do not just need to think about AI, but about NI, natural intelligence. And then once we have a solid understanding of our NI, harness AI in view of HI, hybrid intelligence, because denying that AI is going to play a role in our lives and in the lives of future generations is just the ostrich politics. I don't see the problem, and that's why it doesn't exist. I don't think that's very beneficial. Focusing everything on AI is just as detrimental. And in that sense, considering the fact that it's a tool to an end, and we have a choice in making that end something that's good for ourselves and others, is a huge opportunity. And something else that maybe I want to add in that context is that I and many other listeners, maybe in your podcast, have grown up in an age where there was no cell phone everywhere, and where it was completely normal. You walk out of the house, you have an appointment with a friend, you reach the destination, and until then you can't connect to anyone. So you show up or you don't show up. There is no social media, there's no computer, etc., etc. We all have grown up without ChatGPT or this always available tool to delegate cognitive effort. And in that sense, I think we have a huge responsibility to the next generation that will be Gen AI to leave them a solid legacy in terms of education curricula, which comes back to the double literacy piece that I mentioned before.
With the fact that there's so many inputs happening with artificial intelligence, and it's so easily available for people to find an answer really quickly, find information very quickly, how can coaches tune into their natural intelligence and then provide clients with support?
I think it comes back to what I said earlier, the 4 macro questions, and linking them to the AI to find answers for yourself as a coach. Why are you using AI? Who are you without AI and without any kind of technology? And what makes you unique as a human being? This element of where can AI actually serve in complementarity and help you maybe boost some of the strengths that you have, but where you don't feel you excel in? And finally, what are you never going to delegate? to AI? Like, where do you draw the red line of this is territory that is part of my identity? Defining that early on in your journey, I think, is very important. And coaches need to go through that personal interrogation themselves to actually walk their coachees through that. Answering these questions in a constantly changing landscape where there seem to be new tools emerging every single day, a point of departure, because it's putting in some simple pieces, coming back to the compass that we mentioned earlier, and it's giving you a roadmap to navigate around. Granted, the answers to these questions might change, but the simple fact that you have asked themselves, what am I without my tools? What is it that is part of my identity? What is it that I feel I'm losing if I'm delegating it? I might get great outcomes, but do I still feel I am me? If this was something that was part of how I defined myself. Maybe a person is very proud about their ability to draw. Now, all of a sudden, in the tip of a finger, you can have Dali give you something beautiful, fantastic, professional, in a fraction of the time that you would have used using your pen and pencil. But the fact that you have the output, does it give you the satisfaction of the process? And these kind of interrogations, I think, are interesting to be had with coaches.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We are going to start to wind down, but before we totally wrap up, I'm curious about what your personal goals and your vision is for social change in relation to, hybrid intelligence.
In the short term or in the medium term perspective, what I would like is for schools, not only in the US, but around the world, to integrate basic modules around double literacy. Because I think we all have tremendous potential to thrive. But to thrive, be that online or offline, we need a holistic understanding of ourselves, of the society that evolves in, and the tools that are at our disposition. The classic education curricula, no matter in which country one looks, are not configured for that. With AI being around, we're very quickly moving into a social landscape where it's no longer enough to just have information or to just have answers, but where critical questioning and critical thinking and big picture strategic analysis are becoming much more important. That kind of mindset, if we could curate that from an early age, would make such a difference. Also because it gives a much more empowering perspective to young people, but to people at all age, because it's never too late to change yourself and to change the world around you. And that is something where you don't need technology and where you don't need a lot of tools. But it's a simple endeavor that is, if you like, very low tech, but can be undertaken by everyone everywhere. And then the second piece, and that's maybe in parallel, is the setup of this hybrid intelligence hub, which is a home for like-minded thinkers and practitioners who want to make that happen. So these are my short-term goals.
Those are fantastic. Thank you for sharing them.
Thank you.
How can people connect with you after listening to this podcast?
They can follow me on Forbes, where I'm regularly writing on prosocial AI and hybrid intelligence, also on Psychology Today, as well as on LinkedIn. And I have a new book coming out in a couple of months.
Great, fantastic. And we will link those connected to the show so that people can connect with you that way too. But it's been so wonderful to have you here and talk about this really important topic and new lens of looking at AI and our natural intelligence and how we combine them and really impact the world for a greater good.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Cornelia. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone listening in to Coaching Revealed today. We will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaching Revealed, brought to you by the Institute of Coaching. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at instituteofcoaching.org. You can stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast by liking and following Coaching Revealed. You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X with the handle Institute of Coaching. We also love hearing from our guests, so please reach out to us with thoughts you have on this episode and any questions you have about coaching. Until next time, this is Emily Terrani with Coaching Revealed.